Welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, where today we will discuss Chapter 5 of Freemasons for Dummies, how Freemasons are organized, who does what, and why.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our thoughts and opinions are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions via our website at theworkingtoolspodcast.com.
Today on the Working Tools Podcast, we have our foursome is back intact again.
Yay!
We have Steve Chung, who is a member of Prince Charles Lodge in lovely Kelowna, British Columbia. Craig Graham, a member of Kalamalka number 160 in Vernon, British Columbia. David Colbeth from King Solomon number 60 in Auburn, Washington. And I'm Matt Appel, and I'm a member of Mill Creek number 243 here in lovely Montlake Terrace, Washington. And being done with Chapter 4, we are now moving on to Chapter 5 of Freemasons for Dummies. And I guess my impression in reading this, not so much as a new Mason, but with the podcast in mind, is a lot of this information, I would imagine, is pretty basic to a lot of Freemasons, and they probably already know a fair amount of this. And having said that, we'll now have 18 tangents that will take us 3 hours to record. But did you guys have any grand revelations from this stuff, or does it all seem pretty standard to you?
Well, I would hope that we're getting a little more disciplined than that, and getting better at this as we all become podcast veterans. But I thought this chapter was very well done, very well organized, and like you said, it's basic information. But for somebody who has an interest in the subject, who perhaps is not a member of the organization, it's going to give you some fairly straightforward, useful kind of foundational information. I kind of think of where people go wrong on this subject. You know, you watch those History Channel documentaries that come up about Freemasonry, and there's booming music in the background, not great editing, and all of the video is cobbled together from about 15 different sources that don't mean the same thing. And then people think, oh, so that's what Freemasonry is. It's like, no, start with something like this and get a much better grounding in it. That's kind of my opinion.
One of the things which was enforced right off the bat, as I recall in this chapter, that I always tell Masons is that tell interested people rather, is that there's no Supreme Lodge of the United States or anything like that. It's, the Grand Lodge of Washington, the Grand Lodge of British Columbia and the Yukon, the Grand Lodge of whatever, Florida, and the Grand Lodge of Belgium, and are all the same, on the same level. And maybe the UGLE, half a step up from that. But, in theory, they're all parallel organizations. There's nothing above us saying, world conspiracy wise, trying to organize things. So,
yeah, I made a side note that I guess, I understand that countries and provinces and other things are kind of, and even the states are kind of like many countries in their own, but it is what has been surprising to me even till now, that there isn't some international or at least national group that, and as we read further, there's ideas of that, like the Orients in France, that there isn't somebody, whether they're really in charge or not. And I guess the closest we get to that is maybe the Conference of Grand Masters in North America, or there's a global conference on Masonry as well. But it still is just surprising me to some extent that there hasn't been some kind of body that tries to. And I guess, like you said, maybe UGLE is that to some extent, just a little bit. I mean, remember we talked to what was his title? The guy from the UGLE.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, sir. I'm sure you're not listening to us. But he was the ambassador. He was the ambassador for the UGLE, and we kind of posed that question to him, and he said, "Yeah, we kind of understand that the UGLE is looked to as the head, if you will, or the little bit of the not governing, but I don't know how you want to say that."
The oldest brother.
Yeah. And so they do understand that and try to respect that idea in things they do. And so, but at least in the United States likes to create organizations, and especially likes to have a single head many times. And so it's always been surprising to me that there hasn't been a U.S. Grand Lodge of sorts, or U.S. Orient, if you want to call it.
I
I
don't know
will
that
say
we.
when I was traveling on the East Coast a few years ago with the family, we stopped at the grave of a guy whose name I cannot remember right now. I can't. I'll get there eventually. Who was briefly the Grand Master of the United States? Who, like, because there was some movement to have an umbrella organization and whatever, and this was like, I think, back in the colonial days, and he died shortly thereafter, and nothing ever came of it. But it's on his he's got a, not just a gravestone, but one of those, ones that covers the whole plot, stones, and it's got all sorts of stuff inscribed on it. One of which is first Grand Master of the United States of America. I thought, or no, it wasn't the United States of America. It was first Grand Master of America or the colonies or something like that. But it was there was very briefly, and I think there was another movement like that after the, was it after the Morgan affair? There was another movement like that at some point to try and have a supreme body. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
I don't know if I'd want a supreme body. I
Yeah.
like it the way it is. I'm sort of, this is the way I've grown up in Masonry, so to speak. So I'm kind of used to it, and it's interesting because you can. I mean, it's a little chaotic. It's a little bit like herding cats, but I wouldn't even want to try and form a Grand Lodge because we've all been meetings where to our local lodge meetings where we can't seem to agree on anything. I wouldn't want to try and extend that to some kind of national level.
Yeah, I would agree that I guess I like what we've got now too. It does seem to some extent to stall progress in some cases, though. I know Matt likes to be progressive on ideas, and so but anyway, if a Grand Lodge says I want to do this, now maybe there's taking a step back in the eyes of most Grand Lodges, but if a Grand Lodge were to say we want to be progressive, and well, take for example, it talks about later Prince Hall Grand Lodge in the 1800s. The Grand Lodge of Washington was progressive and said we want to recognize, or did recognize, Prince Hall, and then they had to take a step back because all the other Grand Lodges were going to remove recognition.
Mhm.
So that was a pretty big step back then. But even if you wanted to make a small step forward, and you'd have to really have a Congress of the other Grand Lodges already agreeing to it so that you could do it in mass almost.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you would never have any progress.
Yeah, yeah. What would it add? I guess is the question.
Yeah,
But
true. But I guess for me, I thought of kind of like our Grand Lodges operate under our lodges. It's a place to take your grievances or ideas. Where now the closest thing we have to that again, I think, is the Conference of Grand Masters North America, where they get together and discuss things, but don't really approve or vote on stuff. They just talk amongst themselves.
Yeah, just so that they know what's going on in each
Yeah.
different jurisdiction, right? It's funny because the whole structure thing, and then yet at the jurisdiction level, that's it. We go no further. No, don't want to go there. Right? It lets us act differently at that level, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's actually kind of interesting, but I do like um, having it at a stop at a jurisdictional level rather than a national or international level.
I think things like Cogmina are valuable because they, like you say, the discussions happen and everybody kind of moves in the same general direction, but it's not adding another layer of bureaucracy and administration that has to be, ultimately has to be paid for at the local level.
Well, then wouldn't it become more like the things we're not supposed to talk about, like politics, right?
Good.
I can see how that could easily end up going that direction if they were to try and instill another level.
Mhm.
Right. Right now, it's like everybody can do what they want to do, but we all go to the Conference of Grandmasters to talk about it, and so that we all try to stay on a similar path, right? Checks and balances.
yep.
Talking about
So
differences, go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just say talking about differences. This next section talks about the lodge and what the lodge is, and you're probably going to have a similar segue. I put in the margin that at least I purposely try to call our building the temple. And I know later it says that they went away from that idea because they didn't want to make it religious connection. But I do make the emphasis to explain that that's the building, the temple is the building, and the lodge is the men, and not even really the room. I mean, I even try to call it the ceremony room, although I come from a rental manager standpoint that it could have different ceremonies in there, but I call it the ceremony room, not necessarily a lodge room, but because a lodge room is wherever the guys meet, right? If you are together somewhere else and you open a lodge, that's where the lodge room is, or the lodge space, or whatever you want to call it. So, yeah, anyway, it was just interesting to me that he talks about the lodge within a lodge within a lodge, or whatever he said.
Yeah, around here, I think people kind of like you were saying, don't. I've heard very few people can call the building a lodge. Usually, it's either a temple or a Masonic center.
Mhm.
But yeah, lodge is not a common
Yeah,
term.
I watched a couple of guys chat about the so like in Kamloops it's referred to as the Kamloops Masonic Temple, and in Kelowna it's the Masonic Hall, and a couple of guys started to get into the discussion of, well, it should be called the temple. No, it should be called the hall, right? And into a bit of a heated debate it got eventually, and then thank goodness the meeting had to start and everybody had to shut up with the rap of the gavel. Right. But it was like, wow, they get really defensive on their beliefs and why they think it should be that way and everything, right? But when it comes down to the bylaws and Constitution, you're right, David. It's wherever the worshipful master decides to call the meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, ours
Just
has an
happens to
address.
be there.
Wherever you meet in the building, the Nile Shrine building has a bajillion rooms. So yeah, but we just have an address, right? So
That's one thing we've talked about before and I actually brought it up in one of our meetings at our lodge, our leaders meeting. Could we have our meeting in the dining room instead of in the ceremony room? And at first it was like a little bit of a gasp for people, but then we sat back and said, well, why couldn't we? We're at the same address, like you Matt just said. It doesn't specify a room that we have to be in, and that may allow for a unique experience to have. Not, I wouldn't call it a table lodge, but the idea of
But that is one of the next thing I was going to go to is it's no different than us having a table lodge, which is in our version of it, it's a tiled meeting,
yeah.
right? And it's just being held in the banquet hall, right?
We don't have a jurisdictionally sanctioned table lodge degree. It's approved as an authorized work, if you will, but it's not part of our standard work.
Right. And it's not, yeah, there's none of that stand in our standard work either, but it does. There are different versions of it that have been used over the years, but because the principle of opening a lodge is still procedurally done,
Yeah.
it can be considered a tiled lodge meeting, right? So, which I think is cool, because it allows us that opportunity to do something different.
He talks a little bit about how lodges are numbered too, and it was interesting. If you remember, a few shows ago we had Jeremy on talking about the Morgan Affair, and he's actually a member of Stillicum number 2 in Washington, and so that was the second lodge in the state of Washington to ever be formed under the Grand Lodge of Oregon, as they received their charter from Oregon. And then I talk about how our but it was actually not the state of Washington at the time. It was the territory of Washington. Washington hadn't become a state until 1889, in November of 1889. And so in 1888, several lodges petitioned our Grand Lodge to become lodges. I think it was 5. And then that was in June. And then in November, the state became a state. And then the next June, we had our annual communication, and those 5 lodges were granted their charters, starting with Verity Lodge number 59 that Zane is a member of, Zane McCune. So Verity is technically the first lodge to be chartered in the state of Washington, and my lodge, King Solomon 60, is the second lodge to be chartered in the state of Washington. So I draw a thin line between our two lodges, Steilacoom number 2 and King Solomon, because they were the second to be the territory of Washington. We're the second to be the state of Washington. So it's kind of fun.
Okay, so then that kind of leads into part of a discussion that the numbered the lodge, the lower number, the older the lodge, and there are some guys who, will join a lodge just to keep that lodge alive because it's one of the oldest lodges in the jurisdiction.
Yeah.
Right. Why? Right. Just because it's one of the oldest lodges in the jurisdiction. Yeah, it's got a great history, and there's probably a whole bunch of great stories and Masonic education that can come from that. But to keep to hodgepodge things to keep a lodge alive just because it's numbered 1 or 2, it's got a low number. It's never made any sense to me. I'm a sentimental guy, and all that, but that means to me, preserve the history, preserve the stories from that lodge, and perpetuate them throughout the jurisdiction or at least the district, so that it maybe its memory or it's remembered more often. I think would be kind of cool, but some guys go to great lengths, and I don't understand that. Do you?
I would kind of agree with you to some extent. It depends on the reasons for keeping it open. What we have done in Washington, at least for one of the lodges that did end up turning a chartering years ago, was to reopen it as a historical lodge. So Grand Mound number 4, is it, Matt? Do you know? 3? Grand Mound number 3 was reopened 20-ish years ago, maybe. I don't know how long ago it was, as a historical lodge. And so they meet once a year, and it's maybe I'll talk about it offline, but
well, that's kind of like Barkerville, I think, isn't it? Similar concept that I think they meet once a year. It's a historical lodge, right?
Yeah, it's one of the, I think, what is it, Steve? It's number 4.
Yeah.
On the BC registry.
Yeah.
And I mean, Barkerville and Wells, which is the community that's right next to it. I think it's about 300 people that live there. I thought I'd read somewhere that they meet about maybe 3 or 4 times a year. It's a little more frequent than I think once, but they're I don't think they're by any means a regular attending lodge, because they're an hour and a half off the highway there, and small populations, so it just you just aren't.
Yeah.
And the building itself is in a national historic site, so it's I think they've got a lot of rules about what they can do with the buildings. So yeah, but it is kept going.
Yeah, and every year the Grand Master and the whole line go up there and make a big to-do about going to Barkerville. Right? But yet it's so far north and it takes forever to get there. It's like, I want to go one time. I just can't take a week off to do the trip there and back. Right?
Is that the one where he was just at recently, where you have to fly up there and then drive 6 hours north from there? And then canoe another 20 miles.
yeah, pretty much. And this year it was in the midst of wildfire season, and it almost got canceled. And then last minute they managed to be permitted to stay, and they got control of the wildfire. But I tell you, it was like everybody was sweating bullets. Am I going? Am I not going? Am I going? Am I not going? Right? And so I mean, eventually one day maybe I'll be retired and I can go, but or maybe one guy will take a cell phone and get me some video to watch, and I'll understand it a little better.
So
go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just to go back to a tangent we were already talking about. I found it interesting. I've known for some time that Massachusetts doesn't have numbers on their lodges. I didn't know why. And I
Oh,
found that little
interesting.
nugget interesting. The there were multiple Grand Lodges that had lodges in Massachusetts. So when they formed the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts and took the Irish and the Scottish and the English lodges in, they all had different numbering systems, and they just went, fine, we just won't do it, which I thought was interesting.
Well, how do they know which one's more important?
I was gonna say, yeah, I guess that kind of levels the playing field, you know.
I like
Mind
that idea,
you,
actually.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I go through two districts very regular, and to me it's like, the numbers don't really mean anything to me. I know that the lodge has a name. I always say, I'm going to Miriam, or I'm going to Kalamalka, or I'm going to, the name of the lodge. I never mention the number, right? The only time I mention a number is when I'm typing it out in a message that goes out, and I don't even know why I do that. I guess it's by habit, or that's how they're identified. So I do it, but it sure would make a lot more sense to not have a numbering system. That's for sure.
And I sort of go the opposite way. I actually quite like the numbers. It gives you it just seems to me to sort of stretch a sense of continuity through the registry, and you start going through it and you realize, oh, there's some numbers are missing. What happened there?
Sure.
Some lodges have hyphenated names, like an aristocratic marriage, and it's what happened there. And I just think it's a way of kind of acknowledging the history as we all advance through this.
Yeah, like
Well,
King Solomon.
yeah, it does make you think when you hear like Peachland 56, right?
Mhm.
That was an amalgamation of Trepanier number 80 and Summerland 56. They kept the number, renamed the whole thing, and kept the oldest number. And then you go into the history books, and well, 56 was Summerland. I guess it poses questions and creates conversation. So, you know, anything that can keep a memory alive, I suppose.
And our highest number in British Columbia doesn't even come up to 200 yet in all our years, and in England it's over 10,000.
Wow.
I don't know what the most recent warrant number in under the UGLE would be, but it's over 10,000 now.
Hmm.
So that's that. Although that is, if you're a member of Lodge 9,754, I'm not sure. Maybe the numbering system kind of breaks down a bit there.
When your number's longer than your name.
Yeah, what was the George Lucas film, THX something something,
1138.
1138. There we are. Yeah, it's sort of gets to that point almost.
And how high do the numbers go in Washington?
317.
Hmm. And are there still 317 lodges?
No.
Hmm.
Or 100, and I want to say
160?
46.
Goes it down to 46?
148, somewhere in there.
Hmm. Interesting project to go through all the numbers and see who's still alive. And yeah, interesting.
So I just Googled it, and the Grand Lodge of England Lodge number 10,000 was chartered in 2021. So there may have been a few since then, but
wow,
they're in that general vicinity.
Not to continue to belabor these first two pages, but
I knew we could get another 3 hours out of this.
We were talking about names of lodges, like ours is King Solomon Lodge. We meet in the city of Auburn, and so do you refer to your lodge as the city or the lodge or both? Or in your case, Kalamalka that's the name of the city, right? And so it's the Kalamalka, or is it not? I mean,
it's the name of the lake that is immediately to the south of. So
right.
You talk about the names, you often get geography plays a big part of it.
Right.
I don't think there's a jurisdiction in North America that doesn't have a King Solomon Lodge.
Right.
In it. We've got one in British Columbia. I think in Arizona it's number 5, but it's just that's a very same things with most jurisdictions I think have an acacia
Sure,
you know,
sure. All of the
and then
prominent
all of
names.
the we had at one time all of the 5 orders of architecture were named lodges in British Columbia too.
Mhm.
Yeah, Tuscan, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, and Composite. We had all those lodges.
Interesting.
A couple of them still
Yeah.
exist. Yeah.
I know we have Doric
St.
and
John's, that's
Corinthian.
another common one.
What's that? Yeah.
St. John's, that's another common one.
Yeah. Yeah. St. Andrews. We had a Meridian Lodge in British Columbia, and I've seen that name before. It was and that was actually the Daylight Lodge in the city of Vancouver for years and years.
Robert Burns is actually not an uncommon lodge name too. There's a few of them around. There used to be a traveling gavel that was sent from Robert Burns Lodge to Robert Burns Lodge all around the world.
Yeah, I'd heard that. We had a thing at my mother lodge where we the 3 lodges that had been formed in the same year, 134, 135, and 136 all had a chain of friendship that was around. One thing I will say though that the you do a lot more, much more of in the United States, and I don't think we hardly do it at all in Canada, is you have a lot of lodges that are named after locally well-known Freemasons. Like I think in Washington State, you had a Yancey Blaylock Lodge somewhere, so I assume he was a
Past
locally.
Grandmaster, yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. And same with Thornton F. McElroy, was our first Grandmaster. There's a lodge named after him, and yeah, there's quite a few of those.
We have a one that's named after the guy who founded D. Malay, whose name is escaping. Frank S. Land. We have a Frank S. Land Lodge.
Our daylight. We have a few daylight lodges, but we have one prominent one. I'll give you 2 guesses what their name is, and the first one doesn't count.
Daylight Lodge.
As if by
the other
magic.
one is like Ridgefield Daylight Lodge, I think. Yeah.
See, at that point, I'm like, come on, guys. Was Rising Sun already taken? Like, you know?
Yeah. We actually, our lodge is currently contemplating renaming ourselves because we merged, and the name we have now is the name that came out of the merger, but it's named for the town 2 towns over, the town of Mill Creek, the city of Mill Creek, which is not where we meet or have ever met or have anything to do with.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's actually a movement in our lodge right now to find a new name that meets the spirit of the lodge as it is, not as we thought it might be 7 years ago. So
Okay.
So, what's inside the lodge as we get to page 2 of this chapter?
Chris is gonna message us again.
Yeah, so we have, again, there's a lot of similarities to lodges around the world, but I'm sure there are places that are exceptions where the lodge is at least symbolically oriented east to west. I know several lodges just in my district that don't actually face east to west.
I was just going to ask, do all of your lodges, your ceremony rooms, do they all face actually east and west?
No, ours in our hall is backwards.
Yeah.
Really?
We could, no matter which way we tried, we could not. Well, we could have made it right, but it would have made the room half the size, just due to where the entrance and the fire escapes and things were, and so on and so forth. Yeah, it would have made for a very small room. So they chose just to leave it, or to maximize space, right? Which is good.
In Vernon, we're good. We're on the east side of the highway there, and so our room points east, and so although oddly enough we usually have it backwards when we do when we do any sort of formal dining in the room downstairs, but that's usually the head table's usually seated in the north. But oh well, I haven't been there long enough to raise my objections to that one, so I'll leave it alone for the time being.
Yeah, when it's your job as junior warden, you can organize it any fashion you want.
Yeah,
you're the guy. You're the guy who's going to go down and set up the table. So why not, right?
Exactly.
Somebody will come in. Why is it set up this way? Well, because Craig said so.
Right.
Our building is generally oriented north and south, but it's 100 feet by 70 feet wide. And so in one end of it essentially is where our ceremony room is, and it's about a 60 by 40 room, and it does face east and west.
Okay.
But yeah, there's other.
It's a good size.
It is probably too big for
Okay.
most things, except that it is nice to have that space when we have for our installations or whatnot. We'll have most of the time 100-ish people for a lodge installation. We've had more in the past. But yeah, the sizes are dwindling, and it would be hard to reduce that room effectively. So that would be another problem if we had to try and figure out how to borrow some of that space somehow. But
So yeah, does anybody have any other interesting tidbits about lodge rooms?
I wanted to ask about the candles. I mean, I guess we've got probably a couple of minutes here before we need to break off. How do you, some of these traditions in lodges, it makes me laugh. We have in our lodge room, we have this little pedestal with the lights on it. We have electric lights. We don't have candles. Where it was for some reason, I don't know if it's actually in the bylaws. I don't think it's ever been in the bylaws, but it's this unwritten rule that we can't have candles in our ceremony room. And so we have electric lights. And it's a little triangle shaped pedestal with 3 bulbs on it with a single switch. And it sits off to the right as you're facing east. And that's where our lights are. A lot of lodges, of course, have gone to potentially 3 candles over there or arranged in different formats. Some say the long edge should be on the east. Some say the long edge should be in the west, and depending on where the candle placements are. And if you look at any old pictures, most of them, the long side is on the east. But it's just funny. What I was going to say is that I don't know where this little pedestal light thing came from, but boy, if I wanted to change that, I'm sure I would be banished.
Oh yeah. It's probably very old. It probably came out of a Masonic supply catalog in the 1920s somewhere. Do you guys have a standard ritual that describes how the tapers should be displayed around your altar?
In a triangular pattern.
Triangular pattern. Okay. Because I've got in my collection of books here, I've got one that's quite a detailed account of the development of ritual in the United States and a lot of the stories that go with it. But there's actually a chart and illustrations that show all the different jurisdictions in the United States and how they have their tapers or candles or lights, however you want to describe it, around the altars. And it's quite different. You know, there's a small triangle in some jurisdictions, but that small triangle is elsewhere in others. And then there's some that are quite wide so it's again one of those interesting things that displays a difference in practice. It's also interesting to me that you guys are kind of in Washington State, they're sort of trying to, do different kinds of triangles, what I mean, outside of an established ritual, if there is one.
And do you know why the candles are positioned the way they are in your lodge, Greg?
Somebody did once, and that is frequently a bit of a point of contention when somebody comes out and puts the candles out. Somebody else, not naming names on a podcast, will come and arrange them a certain way, and usually there'll be a lecture accompanying it. And I'm not certain again that that's correct, but I'm not. I'm not dying on that hill just yet.
Yeah. That comes down to a thing called tradition.
Yeah.
Or opinion.
But
yeah.
Whose tradition are we talking about?
Exactly.
Yeah. Which of the 5 individuals that frequently get involved in that debate, which of their traditions are we talking about?
We had a brother that was gone from our lodge for work reasons, other things, for like 15 years. And he came back, and we had changed a few things since the time he had gone. And we were doing something. And he said, well, that's not how we do it. And I looked at him and I said, brother, you've been gone for 15 years. This is the way we do it. He didn't like that so much, but it's the truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the way we've been doing it for the last 15 years, and that's the way it's going to continue to be done, right? Until the next guy in charge changes it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The only other thing we had a discussion about in our immediately last leaders meeting it was a practice we were doing. the altar placement. I read in here that the altar in some lodges is all the way in the east. I know in UGLE in England, it's often in the east rather than the center of the room. I turned to one of our guys and said, "Why do you think we do it that way?" And he goes, "Because the light's in the middle of the room." He was being sarcastic. Yeah. But
Yeah, somebody asked me once about the their opinion wasn't being heard about how the candles should be placed. He says, "Well, how do I change that?" I said, "Get your ass in line, become the worshipful master, and for your year you can say they have to be however you want them set."
yeah, good luck.
And just know that all those that believe it should be this way will resist you in that effort. And he says, "But when I'm worshipful master, what I say goes, right?" I said, "Yeah, that's right."
For those that can't see, we're all gritting our teeth.
Yeah.
We say we'll talk about that later. We say the worship master's in charge, but
he's in line though. He's now in line. So we'll see how that goes.
That's one of those things where you discuss the old saw about there's theory and then there's practice. Which do you want to do here?
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Maintain peace and harmony.
Yeah, great. Yeah, and peace and harmony has to get mixed into that.
So I feel like we're about wrapping up for this session. I do feel also like I just noticed something that is different though. Very worshipful brother Stephen Chung from Prince Charles, number 153. Are you explain that to me?
Well, I got a promotion. They trusted me with a shiny, pointy object and call me Grand Tyler now for the year. So in June, I was installed as the Grand Tyler for the jurisdiction of British Columbia and the Yukon, all the way up until next June. That's the title I get to hold. I get to now sit in the East with my other counterpart there from the Grand Lodge, the District Deputy Grand Master, and follow him around the jurisdiction. It's kind of fun.
Cool. Very
cool. Thanks for noticing.
And well, this show won't.
Was that?
Did they let you keep the sword, Steve?
Well, actually, I was told no, and but now somebody said, "Well, how come you don't have your sword with you?" I said, "Well, they told me I couldn't take it." Right? And he said, "Leave that with me." Right? So we'll see how that goes.
I was going to say too that even though this show won't air till next week, it is Matthew Appel's birthday today. Happy birthday, Matt! Hey.
Bona fête à toi. Bona fête à toi.
Where's the mute button? Where's the mute button?
Bona fête à toi. Happy birthday, buddy.
Oh, thank you. 52 down. 52 to go. As I reflect on the first quarter of my life. So on that somewhat disturbing note, unless anyone has anything else exciting to say, we will wrap up our discussion here of Chapter 5, for this part of Chapter 5, the first 2.5 pages of Chapter 5, I think, and look forward to working on the next bit again soon. On behalf of David and Craig and very worshipful brother Stephen and myself, we thank you all for listening to the Working Tools podcast, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Goodbye.